All right, everyone. This is the 14th Health Talk we've had with Citizen Health, and the topic of this is on our open source initiatives. So, at a very high level, what we're trying to do is completely change healthcare, the way it's paid for, the way it's managed, the way care is coordinated, and the way data is used. And, I'm gonna mute that. And we have a lot. We have a lot going on. We have a lot of initiatives, very bold plans on healthcare in America. And it starts. We've been doing this for the past year, actively developing, and now we are launching some open source initiatives, and it's pretty interesting, pretty fun stuff. We have Nabil. He's going to be walking through all of this. He's put it all together, done a great job architecting the plans, and I'm going to just turn it over to Nabil. He's got some slides to share with us, with everyone, and kind of go through there for about 30, 45 minutes and open it up for discussions, and let's just have a good talk about open sourcing in healthcare.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Nabil, and I've been working with Citizen Health for almost 9 months now. So I've been working on the software side of things, and like Brendan said, the whole idea of Citizen Health is to sort of disrupt, the status quo that's happening today. And something that Brendan always says is that he has these statistics that the US spends twice as much money as any high-income other country. So in healthcare. So in Citizen Health, we're trying to change that, and we have a lot of different ideas. So two of those ideas are very essential to our whole technology, and we want to open source them. So the first one is about easy access to your data. So we want everybody to have an easy access to their data and to control it. And the second one is when you have all this data, we want actually the patients and the doctors, the physicians, to make sense of that data. So we're starting, it's an open source initiative, but it's divided into different projects. And I'm going to just talk briefly about those projects. So I'm going to share just a slide with you guys, and let me know if you can all see it.
Yeah, it looks good. We see it.
Okay. So this is basically our first project, and it's not an electronic medical record, but more like universal health data hub. So what we want to do is we want to get all your data, all your health and medical data from different providers. And nowadays, a lot of people have wearable devices. So those also count as health data. So, but they're all kind of distributed. So we want to get your data from Fitbit, Apple, Apple Health if you have it, your pharmacy, your insurance company. Normalize it, put it all together in one flow, and then drive it to either storage or just use it as it is. So the problem with a lot of projects that are trying to put all your data in the blockchain is that it doesn't actually solve the problem of security, because your data is still at the provider anyways. I mean, Apple still has your data. So you can have it in the blockchain, but they still have it there. So what we're trying to do is maybe the first step is trust those providers, keep your data there, but just, authenticate, get all your data together, and then either, send it to your physician, having you looking at it, to send it to third party, it's going to be your choice. So to be able to do that, we need a lot of things around this, this kind of flow. So we need first to authenticate. So you want to make sure that your data is secure. And to be able to authenticate, we're going to work on several ways of doing that. Some recent ways like biometrics, heart signature, fingerprint, image, phone authentication. So we want to have that module ready so that you can authenticate, pull all your data, and then share it. And if you want to share it, there's several different ways of sharing your data. So you might want to share only part of your data. You want to share all your data. You want to share it anonymously. You want to share it, with your identity tag to it. You can also share it, have a timestamp on the sharing. So if you want to share it only for 2 days, you should be able to do that. And then the permissions disappear. And last but not least, we want to also give you an easy way of visualizing all this data. A lot of this data is really hard to visualize. For in our app, Humantive, that's in beta right now, we borrowed from an open source project this cool notion. It's called an H-graph, and it's kind of visualize all your health data in one visual graph. And you can kind of zoom in, zoom out to see all this, all the information. So we want to also do that so that it's easy for people to visualize it. So that's the kind of high overview of the first project. The second one, we're kind of still studying and trying to design it, but it's basically an easy way of visualizing all your data. Today, a patient will go and see, for example, all your health data, all the metrics. It's really hard to make sense of all of that. So what we're trying to do is maybe come up with a hierarchical way of seeing that. So can we have in Humantive right now, we have something called the health score. It's one number, and it will give you an idea about how you're doing today, but also how you improved from yesterday. So it's very high level. So I can understand it. But if I want to look at little more details, maybe I want to go to the second level of the hierarchy, which is maybe grouping my, finding patterns. Like, for example, activity. I mean, for activity, I can have metrics on my active minutes, my steps, how many times I exercised. For sleep, I can look at my deep sleep. So all this category, if we group them, we can also come up with some little scores, and going all the way down to what you see at your doctor, heart rate, blood pressure, metabolic panel count, etc. So the idea is basically to come up with this algorithm and also provide it easily to developers so they can develop applications on top of it. So we're trying, it's an open source, so we're trying to get developers, because that's going to be, heavily technical, but we're also looking for providers, for physicians, for patients. We need ideas. It's a greenfield project, so we're starting from almost scratch. We're using some of these modules in our app right now, but we want to rethink it. We want to, think outside of the box, bring all these ideas together, and get something that's open source, and hopefully that can be adopted by other big companies or big software tools. So, I don't want to go deep in details, because I'm not sure what's the level of technicalities of the audience here. But if you have any questions on the high level ideas, and then we can maybe talk, question answers on these two projects.
Nabil, this is Matthew Rill. Could you, when I think of open source, I'm thinking of things like Wikipedia and Python and WordPress. So those are the things that come to mind that I have some familiarity with. Can you talk about the philosophy behind open source? Because to me, it seems to be more of a philosophy and that you're trying to work with other open source entities like the HGraph people. So if you or Brendan could comment on that, that would help put this in context for me a little bit more.
Well, there's two ways of doing open source. There's the most known way, which is a company makes a product. It's it's proprietary, and then they decide to open source it. So it's already done. They get it out there, and then they ask people to contribute, sometimes by just fixing bugs, but they don't do a lot of, they don't help design the idea. And then there's projects like Wikipedia, Python, Linux, for example, where a lot of people get together and decide to build something, and then they can partner with other big companies, or other open source projects and putting together. In our case, again, because it's a brand new project, we're starting from scratch. What we're trying to do is just like citizen health role would be to organize this, but we won't have a lot of say in what's been done and how this is going to be used. So that's pretty much our perspective on this project, and we're welcoming anybody who wants to come. We're going to have contributors who are going to be contributing. We're going to have some guides, some guidelines on what rules, etc., on how to code, how to participate. If people don't follow the rules. It's very democratic. So that's where we want to go. Does that answer your question? Or
yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah, I want to add a little bit to that too. Yeah, I think you're starting to see some blurred lines between open source and crowdsourcing. Open source has roots in of course, software. And also, I think the term open source, I think this is the 20th year, the anniversary of it. I believe so. It was used before that, but I know the Open Source Institute actually, I think, officially coined that phrase 20 years ago. So 2018 is that 20th year anniversary. But you start to look at what open source can do and really the movement. If you think about it, it's only been around for 20 or 25 years. We're still starting to figure this out, the power of getting large groups of people together for one common goal. In the past, and still to this day, you have companies that operate in silos internally that don't necessarily share ideas or receive ideas from the crowd, from other people. And having an open source mentality, it gives you the ability to source ideas from people outside of your organization. And there's plenty of good ideas that are, people that have great ideas all across the country, but a lot of times there's no avenue for them to come together and combine them and start iterating and building on top of one good idea after the other. So open source and crowdsourcing situations and methodologies, it really brings the power and the knowledge of the crowd together to solve really big problems. And that's what excites me, is this big problem of healthcare. And we're looking at what we're building here. This is the base for a lot of things to be built on top of, and a lot of things we are building on top of, but also the ability to take our data and start aggregating the data together and having people from all over the world work on this open source project to come up with cures for diseases. And I think that's one of the things we should all shoot for, that moonshot initiative, is to say, okay, we do have the technology now to understand our data, and actually to get that data first, then to start understanding it, and then to bring all the smartest minds around the world to sit down and try to figure out how to use this data. So it's a very, very powerful thing that we're just now starting to harness. And I think that the hardest part for really pushing a huge open source initiative like this forward is going to be the governance side too. Who does what, who gets rewarded for what. So we're also building a type of a governance layer on top of this. And I kind of gave a talk in Boston last week, and I mentioned Healthocracy is actually the title of the conference. And Healthocracy is kind of an idea of a new form of governance where it does organize people around the common goal of fixing healthcare. And I would like to open source that too as well later on down the road. It's a cool concept, and we can have that conversation later, but I might be going off on a tangent now, Matthew, but just in general, I do believe that the philosophy around open source is people coming together to solve problems that you couldn't do individually. And it's a powerful idea.
This is Lloyd Biddle. Can I pop in with a question for the group? And
sure.
Just out of curiosity, has anyone reached out to some of the communities such as Open Metsphere and Open Vista, and then the World Vista community, Osera, as well as the Mirth Connect communities? I've worked with those guys, and particularly at Metsphere. I was worked for Metsphere and been in open source for about 20 years now, since the beginning. And I would certainly encourage, if you haven't reached out already, for you to reach out to those folks. I visited with one of the big states a couple weeks ago, and they were doing some open source. They had some mental health facilities that was on open source and using an open source EMR. So just a commentary and then kind of a question coupled with that.
Yeah, I haven't reached out to them, but that's definitely plan on it. This is very early innings on what we're trying to do here. So if you have any resources, if you do want to introduce us, I would greatly appreciate that. And that's what we're here for, start opening up lines of communication with people that can push this further down the field and grow this out to really help a lot of people. I think that's our main focus, is to get this out there and provide value for a lot of people that want to build on top of this and really just make healthcare better again.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer, and I'll certainly make those connections in the coming days. So
much appreciated.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So out of everybody that's listening here, does anybody want to talk about your open source experiences? I know, Lloyd, I did a little research on you, and like you said, you've been around for 20 years doing this. Does anybody want to share some things you've learned, lessons learned, things to avoid and not get wrong to begin with?
I think the question was about what kind of what I would call rules of the road, and I think where I've seen the open source initiatives go, or have a positive trajectory is certainly where you have an active community that's organized, and there's some governance procedures put in place, and the contributions. There's rules of the road around how you contribute and what gets back into the source code and functionality. I found a lot of success where there's a proprietary vendor, for lack of a better term, that has some involvement in pushing that along. I saw that work really well with MedSphere and their Open Vista product, which is an open source EMR. I've also saw World Vista. They're doing something similar with the Vista. Where I've seen it not go so well is where you have a vendor that backs the product. There's not an active engagement with the community, and I think that's probably the key, is that governance in place and then active engagement with some level of bi-directional communication going on. And when that breaks down, it tends to break the project apart. So
it's all about communication. That's what I've learned. Well, in terms of building a community around open source projects, is there a good example that you've seen, anything that works? Because that's what we're trying to do now, is to build a community around really citizen health and these projects, trying to get everybody involved and keep that communication going. We use Slack now. If anybody wants to join that, I can share the Slack link. And we have a lot of communication there, but eventually it'll get lost. It'll just go away and pass that 10,000 message limit. So we're starting a forum that kind of has more staying power. We can start focusing on big ideas and get a lot of feedback and start iterating on those ideas. So, I think that's the common thread with good open source projects, is that community that you build around it. Does anybody have any suggestions, feedback, anything that you've seen that worked for you in the past?
Well,
I was actually, sorry.
Go ahead.
So I was just going to when you said Slack, I was just going to say that. So I, last year was part of Mozilla, like Firefox. They did an open source competition based on Slack, and it was a week competition where we were trying to build something. We were trying to build more accessibility into their browser, and the entire week, we had people internationally working on this, and every day you switch teams. And it was amazing what happened in 5 days. I think we had like 5,000 people working on it, and it was amazing what happened. So, it's just the different platforms, the abilities, and the capabilities, and the power of people coming together.
Okay. Yeah, I do think I like that last part, the power of people coming together. I think that is, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to harness. The power of us, our intelligence, our backgrounds and experiences and ideas for the future, and putting all that together to work on these common goals. Whoever gets that right is the one who succeeds. So that's what we're just trying to get right to begin with.
I'd like to make one suggestion and give you a little insight into the Mayo Clinic, which I wouldn't necessarily say is open source, but they do have a philosophy of sharing research and sharing information. The Mayo Clinic has roughly 30 to 50 million website visits a month. And that is a large part of what gives them leverage in terms of social media, where they have 1.8 million Twitter followers and really gives them a worldwide reach. And despite them being 1/10 of the size of some much larger organizations, they may be an order of magnitude more in terms of digital reach. I've talked to their directors. I'll be talking to them again soon in a couple weeks. One of the strongest parts of their digital platform is they have a simple page structure which shows definitions of diseases. So when you type in a disease, whatever it is, you're probably going to see a Mayo Clinic page devoted to that disease. It's not fancy. It's something that could be written by a good medical student or a couple-year doctor. But they have the repository of very simple web pages. And in our recent discussion on blockchain and our recent discussion on Health OS, even a very simple structure of definitions. I don't know, for example, in blockchain, I don't see that repository of healthcare blockchain knowledge out there. Eric Topol's information that you gave me, his newsletter, may be one place or one source of healthcare open source information. But I think it's something to look at. The structure of the Mayo Clinic is very simple. Disease, web page, but it's what gives it that 50 million visits a month. That's kind of the core. That's what made it what it is in terms of its digital presence. And its Citizen Health might be able to do something fairly simple like that, or maybe in conjunction with some of these other open source folks like HGraph and whatnot. So that's one suggestion out there.
Kind of like a wiki almost, just kind of be an information source for people.
Correct. The Mayo Clinic is basically a wiki, and it's the other one is obviously WebMD. But these companies have different philosophies, for profit, not for profit, and so and the quality of information may be different. But wiki pages on some of these topics we're talking about might be something that would give a foothold in the digital open source community.
All right, I'm taking notes, so thank you for that.
And can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
And just to kind of jump on something that Lloyd said, just as background, me and Lloyd were part of the same company for a little bit, where maybe at the tail end, they weren't taking care of the open source community like they should have. And that's a big thing about open source community is it's reciprocity, right? Don't get too big for your britches. Don't forget where you came from. That open source community is who took care of you and helped you get your launch. All of a sudden, don't act like you're too big to help them out now. Same reason where there's a lot of companies using open source technology, but maybe not contributing back. Make sure it's bi-directional. Make sure there's that reciprocity there. Some of the great community things was like the forum for open dialogue. I believe you can also give people access to like Jira or Confluence and stuff like that, to where you have tickets and things of that nature. So that way you can show the progress on it. You can create almost like a Reddit style of things where if there's future features you want to see, you can upvote or not downvote, but upvote what's more important to you. So being open to your community like that of what they want to see is absolutely important. And that's coming from someone who used to be at an open source company as well.
I found an app that you might like, Anthony. I'm going to share this in the chat box.
And while you're doing that, I'd couple that with Anthony's. To mirror his statements, and I don't claim to have this original idea, but I like the metaphor, and that's the Beehive Metaphor. And you can think of an open source project as the Beehive, right? and the beekeeper would be your vendor that's taking care of it and monetizing it through honey, and your bees are your open source community, your developers, your contributors, and there is a symbiotic relationship there. The bees take care of the beekeeper, and the beekeeper takes care of the hive, and the hive produces honey. And if you don't have a beekeeper, your hive's going to die. And if the bees aren't producing honey, the beekeeper is not going to derive value. So I like that a lot, and I use that often.
I like that. On that note, I want to talk about what the open source developers want out of a project. A lot of it, I know, is for just the satisfaction of contributing to the greater good, building something together. But we want to do something a little bit different too, because we do have blockchain infrastructures. We do have multiple crypto tokens. We do have, if everybody's probably familiar with our app Humanitive, but we have something called Medit, and that's a cryptocurrency that you earn for improving your health. What we also want to do is use that currency for rewards on these projects. For instance, if you're looking at the slide still, let's just say we have about 4 different components that we need developed, and these components are fairly large. Might take a few months for each of them. We might put something like $20,000 worth of our cryptocurrency as a reward for completing this project, and then have everybody come together, contribute as much as you want to contribute, and somehow break that $20,000 down into your contributions, your commits, or whatever that looks like. But you're kind of working for crypto in a way, and I don't want to muddy the concept of what people really want out of these projects. I don't want to just have it being a transactional relationship where you do something, you get paid. I don't want to look at it that way, but also want to incentivize developers to want to do this more. So does anybody have any feedback on how that might work in the real world? Anybody? Does anybody want any crypto?
Well, I think if, say, I received an email of a document to review as a physician, and you send it out to like 20 physicians or 10 physicians, say, we want to publish this, can you give us a once over on an edit, like a small wiki page or something like that? Sure. I think if there was just a little bit of cryptocurrency just for the pleasure of the feedback, it would give me a little extra incentive to do it and to watch it, like the steps on my Fitbit, for example. If I'm at 19,000 steps, I might go out for a walk that night to hit that other 1,000. So I think that if it's a light touch, I think it probably would encourage responsiveness.
Okay. Yeah, that's the way I want people to interpret this, having Medit as that incentive. I just don't want to go down that path. It's kind of when you cross that line of this is strictly almost like a paying job now. And I don't want to go past that line. So it's I guess it's just kind of a gray area in terms of how much. Well, let me back up a little bit. This is almost like these like project. I'm trying to think of the name of it, but basically, I'm trying to think of the name of that website too. But companies go out there and they have these big problems to solve, and they put a prize package on it. Prize of $10,000 for whoever solves this, whoever finds this bug in this code, and they win that prize. So it's kind of the same concept of almost like prize funds. So there's a prize for completing this development sprint for these next 3 months, and the team that does that earns a prize or is rewarded a prize. And it's just something to think about, and we're still tossing the idea around. We're going to do something like that because we do want people to be rewarded in multiple different ways, financially, socially, and just kind of go on down the list of all the ways people gain value in contributing to these projects.
I know for me, contributing to open source, a big way and a big motivator. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. A big motivator for me in the past is, and I think someone mentioned this in the chat as well, is the ability to adapt the project to my needs. And so sometimes it's a little bit more self-serving than it is in the interests of the global world. But what's nice about that is oftentimes when a developer does scratch their own itch and does modify an open source system to solve their own needs, it contributes to a greater need as well, because oftentimes it's not an individual problem that's being solved. It's something that's being addressed to many other people. And I think it's important that an open source project allows that to happen and has an open mind about how the project is used. You know, that benevolent dictators that lead that project are open to the project being used in more creative ways that they may not have initially imagined, and that they're open to the system being extended to the benefit of others. And I think that that's really important. And then the only last thing I'll say that I've seen be really successful, and I'm always very grateful for when it comes to open source, is just general recognition of contributors. So it doesn't necessarily have to be financial, but for some people, it comes down to portfolio or building networking or building credibility as a developer and agency. And it goes a long way to have a call out on the GitHub repo or to have a mention on a page somewhere that's all the different contributors to projects. And those small gestures, whether it's shout outs on Twitter or those mentions in specific repos page that actually attributes a specific piece, it really makes a big difference for people wanting to contribute and feeling like their contribution has value and being recognized for that contribution. Although I really do think as well, you know, direct crypto and other types of reward is also really incentivizing as well. But it's, you know, different people are motivated by different things. And in some cases, the ability to extend your own system or the ability to just receive recognition is sometimes more valuable than you may even realize.
It's a good point. Good point. I like that.
And to piggyback off of that, I may have mentioned this previously, but having worked for that previous open source company on exactly what John's saying there, a lot of times people were just trying to find ways to make their job easier, and they wanted to help them. In the case where I was, it was an integration engine. They wanted to transfer information, but for whatever reason, their department had no money to pay for a whole new integration engine for more connections, right? So they had to utilize an open source technology to try and make it work for them. That had been proven out there and everything else, and they had to put in a lot of work, and it really saved them to the point where as they grew in their jobs, and because that product had been around for 10 plus years, as they grew into higher levels, that goes back to the reciprocity. One of these individuals, I can't name names since we're being recorded here, one of these individuals ended up at a very large organization, and as a thank you, wrote a blog about them from such a very large organization that gave them so much press and so many more leads and so many more sales. And when we reached out to that individual, said like, hey, how did you come about it? He just said, you guys saved me years ago at my old job. And as a thank you, I wanted to write this for you in hopes that it is somehow my way of giving back to you, because I wasn't able to develop as much, but this is my thank you back to you. And that's part of it. It's just that community. And it's a huge part of it. So right on with what John was saying there.
Great.
I can chime in on that too. I started using open source because of a lack of budget, and I had a pain point. So as soon as I started realizing if I was going to go the Microsoft route, I'd spend a lot of money in licensing that I just didn't have. I started using open source. And when I did, I found out it was better in a lot of ways. And like others have said, it's very malleable. You have a lot more freedom to make it do what you want to do. And once I got a handle on that, I realized that, hey, I was able to address one of the other pain points I had. For example, I was running a game server where people were team killing. So I went around and someone had dared me to put something together to fix that. So I did, and I turned around and just released that to the entire gaming community for bragging rights. And I got my name out there. It was kind of cool. It was one of those things, you feel good about giving back once you've realized just how much benefit you gained from being part of that community and being part of that contributor spirit.
I like it. These are all good points. I mean, everything that you guys are saying is going to be wrapped up into what we're doing, because I think everybody here that's on this conference right now have kind of been a part of what we're doing for the past few weeks and months, and we value all of these opinions and experiences, so they'll all be wrapped up into what we're doing. And like I said, just keep the ideas flowing. I think the common thread of what we're hearing here is community, giving back. making everybody feel wanted and make people understand that their work actually is valuable, because every single person's work is valuable in an open source project in one way or the other. Well, so who's ready to start?
It looks like there's a couple good questions there in the chat there. If you guys take a quick second to take a look. James had one first, and then there's another one from Lamia too.
Let's see. Yeah,
I was looking at those also.
Okay, I just had a full screen video of whoever was talking. Let's see. Oh yeah, there's a lot of questions in here. Let's see.
So, well, I can probably try to answer James' question. So the idea, I don't know if you still see the slide. The idea is that we understand that everybody has their own format, data format, interfaces, etc. So what we want to do is basically normalize that at the output of this module called MIDI Flux, so our open source initiative will be encouraging people to create their own little interface inside. So if, for example, I'm using Fitbit, I have an app, I want to use Fitbit, I want to use our open source, well, we're gonna provide all the architecture, the interface structure for them to just integrate it really, really fast. But at the end of the day, for us, we need to have the data in one standard. And again, we're not really planning on only saving it, but we are more working on this as a hub, as more like flow of data. So the flow of data can be in any format. It's all these conversions from where you're coming from to where you're going. That's important, and that's part of the whole open source project.
If you got thinking about it too, this health data that you have there, Nabil, wearables, but moving in the future, we're going to have way more data points as far as computer vision. So vision, you're going to have language,
speech.
You're going to have actually just text, images. All this data that is very relative to our health, and having all that, combining all that, normalizing all that to be able to be used in a variety of different applications. We're only scratching the surface on the amount of data that we can collect now. And I don't know if anybody out there has used Human API or Validic, but those guys are expensive. They've upped their price, and they're one of the two main companies out of like 3 or 4 out there that does something like this. And really, for the developers starting up, or they just have ideas, it's really not financially feasible for them to build something like this. So I think this is huge for all the developers out there that want to put something together in a month's time and test it out with the available data from what we can get now. So that's what I kind of really love about it too, is you bypass all the costly other guys out there and let everybody be able to develop on something that is very valuable. Sorry if I'm rambling there. There's a lot of questions here, and I'm trying to pick back up on all of them. That last one there, the genomic data accumulation. Well, we were using, or we still are using Human API, and 23andMe had an open API where we could get all of your genomic data. Now, I think they closed that down. They closed parts of that down. I'm not sure if it was entirely all of it or what, but I think they decided, okay, we're just going to profit off your genetic data, and we're not going to give it away. It's pretty much what I got out of that. But there are a lot of genomic companies out there that are spinning up, startup genomic companies that are starting to sequence genomes and starting to get that data. So I would love to start working with those companies too, start working with their API to get data from them, because they're kind of not useless, but they would be much more valuable as a company if they did have open APIs, kind of like what Helix is doing in a sense. So as far as the genomic data accumulation, what what we should do and what we will do is look at the genomic data, the microbiomic data, all of our health data, and start putting people into certain pools, data pools, based on certain genetic variants, certain health conditions, completely de-identified here, but have that data available for purchase or lease to pharmaceutical companies, to research companies that need these specific data sets for their research, and they will pay greatly for that. And Matthew, you mentioned that. You said you'd have patients lining up out the door and around the street to come in and sell their data because you're not getting anything for it now. Other companies are profiting off of it. So that is the plan, to start aggregating all this data and letting the patients, letting the people be compensated for it. And it's not even just getting compensated for it, it's actually using it for their benefits too, because now the better data researchers can theoretically have better data to run their models with, run their research with, so potentially come up with better cures, better treatments. So it's a positive feedback loop if we do this right.
So if there's no follow-up question to this, there's Lamia who asked the question about privacy and data ownership. So it's a good question. And what we're trying to do in the first step is basically not store the data yet, but just pull it through authentication methods. So there are some commercial software that do that, the same thing right now. So all you have to do is, you authenticate to Fitbit, and then you give permission to our application to access your data when you need to, and that's what we're thinking about right now. And the other part is that basically the code is going to be open source, so everybody can look at it. It can be audited. So that's the other level of privacy, which is, what does the code? You have to trust the code. We tell you we get your data, but we don't store it. You have to trust that, and to trust it, that's the whole purpose of having an open source. So I think with those two different things, we believe that it's pretty open, and we won't have any problem with data privacy. If you don't want to share things, you should not share them. And when you're sharing, we're not getting them from our storage. We're getting them from Fitbit, your insurance, your pharmacy, LabCorp, all these third parties that already have your data and are certified to keep your data secure and safe. Most of the time. So I don't know if that answers your question, Lamia.
We got a couple more questions coming in too. How about owning the source code? Who owns the source code, Nabil?
Well, it's an MIT license, so I think all the details are in the license, but pretty much you can use it for any commercial, non-commercial use, and it's not patented, it's not copyrighted. It's open source, standard, typical open source code.
Okay. Another question too. How does MetaFlux differentiate from what we're doing? Google has open source API. How do we differentiate from that?
Which Google open source API are you referring to?
I would guess it's Google's new initiative to allow you to transport your data from one provider to another. So they're coming up with a newer open standard that's only right now, it's closed to some specific partners. It is similar in a way, but Google's APIs aren't yet tailored at all toward health data, to my knowledge. So for example, if you're using something like Instagram, Google's newer APIs allow you to import your Instagram photos into your, let's say your Google Drive storage or your Google Photos, or vice versa, or different directions, or your Google spreadsheet data to be able to export that into a Microsoft spreadsheet that's online in OneDrive. And so they're working with a few key data partners. I know Twitter is one of them. Facebook, I believe, is another partner in that. But that's really more about data portability than it is what we're trying to do here. But it is definitely a similar project and that they're trying to break data out of their own holds. And I really commend Google for going down that road and trying to make data more portable and trying to push to those standards. And I could imagine this project have a similar project in the future, to where we're trying to translate data between more data sources back and forth in the future. Because ultimately that is what this is in a way. I was just doing some Googling when I saw that question to find this specific project. It's not yet open source, but I've heard about a lot of it from a couple of developer friends of mine, that this is a kind of more of a data portability project that Google is working on. And I think that's probably what they're referencing.
Yeah, Apple. I can speak on what Apple's doing. Apple is doing a ton of data portability stuff right now. There's a lot that is out there being discussed amongst the hospitals right now, and Apple is on purpose teaming up with as many hospitals as possible to be able to share as much data as possible. The only issue with Apple is that Apple's in a closed environment. It's not in an open source, which I think is where the difference lies between what's going on with Google and Apple. I think that's exactly where that difference lies, but I just know for a fact that Apple is upping their game, and they're upping their game dramatically in that space.
Regarding Apple, Apple has teamed with the Mayo Clinic and Epic, so there's at least a little mini consortium there. And Epic has started to open up to FHIR, F-H-I-R, technology for data portability. So that's the word I keep listening to, or listening for when I hear about electronic health records, is FHIR compatible, or an API for FHIR technology. Google did a major study published in Nature magazine about 4 months ago, using that type of data portability to predict hospitalization stays. And I think they looked at over 1 million or 2 million data sets using deep learning. So the stuff is extracting data from electronic health records is not going to be easy, but the FHIR technology may be the key to that.
I have a dumb question on that. What exactly is FHIR? Because Vanderbilt teamed up with Apple and Epic directly to bring all the Vanderbilt medical records onto the iPhone itself, which is right here. But I understand that Vanderbilt and Apple, they use FHIR as well. What exactly is that? Because I hear about it all the time.
It's so FHIR, fast healthcare interoperability, I think is what it stands for. What I gathered reading the Nature article, and I'm not a software person, so someone could probably reach out to me, is when you take out, say, someone's white count from a chart, you'll be taking out the number white count, okay? It might be, say, a white count of 12. But you're also going to tag that as the white count taken on this day with this metadata. So if you have 2 white counts, now using FHIR, you have data from serial white counts, which is much more valuable than just an isolated white count. So I think it's the raw lab X-ray data, data's from handwritten notes using neural language processing, or natural language processing, and pulling that out in a sequence and flagging it. The Nature article, I can probably drag that down and post that in a minute or two, help kind of guide me through, because that's the first time I ran into it in a big application. And I'll try to post that here in a few minutes if I can.
Yeah, let me pop in just for 1 second, and this is Lloyd Middle. There is an article that I wrote on LinkedIn under my profile about FHIR, and I'd encourage you to read that. But in a nutshell, definitely piggybacking on what the previous speaker had mentioned, the idea behind FHIR is it's essentially an API where the programs can go in and pull discrete pieces of data and essentially talk to each other. But the idea behind FHIR is that everyone will agree to the same format with that API. And it's so it allows you to get the discrete pieces of data. And it's fast healthcare interoperability resources. And the other piece to this is the resources side. And there's defined resources, but there's also the ability to actually customize resources and then define those in the standard. So it's interesting technology. I think it's disruptive technology. I encourage everyone to give that article a read on my profile. Thank you.
Just to add to this, actually, our plan is for storage and for the output of MIDI Flux to be compatible with Fire. Because initially we're going to be compatible with Fire and be able to share, a Fire standard, because it's the standard everybody's moving to. But if there's some specific standard that a contributor wants to add, or some company wanted to add, they can easily come to our open source and add that little API, and they will have their own standards, their own output in that standard.
I had a quick question on that. On the type of language that everything's being built on, is it PHP? Is it Java, JavaScript? Were you guys kind of leaning in all of this as far as the way you're building it? Or is that still up for discussion?
The short answer is it's still up for discussion.
Okay.
But we have some direction. So one of the initial ideas that we were kind of toying with is, should we put all of that in the cloud, or should it be all contained in a mobile solution? So if you're a mobile developer, why do you have to go to our server, or create your own server? Why not? I mean, the data, we don't hold the data so far, so all the data comes from somewhere else. All you need is all these little modules that process the data, and do things with it. So, yeah, it might end up being just a mobile solution. So, which means iOS, Android.
Very cool. Actually, I had a quick question. Whoever was speaking on the Google project earlier, is that part of like the Apogee group, or is it separate from Apogee or the Google Cloud folks, like with like Ashima Gupta as part of? Is that like a sub thing of part of what she does, or completely separate?
I don't have any specifics on it. I just picked up on a conversation. It was literally a meetup about 2 weeks ago. There were some Google engineers there talking through the project. And I read an article somewhere. I did some Googling and I can't find it. But I don't know very much beyond what I said, beyond that they're pushing into more portability projects across those different things with a few key partners. And they do plan on open sourcing that in the future. So, there could be a world where MetaFlux is able to export to your Google Drive. I don't think anyone would want to do that. But if that does expand in the future, there could be potential for that. And I don't have any specifics on exactly what that was or how much they even should have shared with me.
No worries. No, I was just curious, just because there's some cool things over in those groups on Apogee and
Totally.
on Ashima Gupta's side. Like I'm a fan of hers, just in the stuff that she's trying to do as far as being a voice of Google and cloud and interoperability. So a fan over on that side.
Here's that article, Matthew, that you just referencing.
Oh, thank you.
Please, yeah. And also, I want to share another project here. This is standardhealthrecord.org, and the Evolution Studios, the company that started HGraph, they also worked on this project with another open source company, and it's pretty interesting. It's called Standard Health Record, and what they're trying to do is they want to standardize all health data to make it machine readable and to apply AI to it. I think that's their overall mission. And it's worth taking a look at and kind of digging down into what their plans are and the specs behind it. It seems very interesting. I would like to work with this organization just because of how they work with Evolution Studios and kind of just we're all meshed together. So it's I just want to throw that out there. There's another resource for people to dig down into.
Brennan, could you share Eric Topol's article that was like a manifesto of open source health. Do you know the one I'm referring to?
Oh yeah, yeah. Let me see. And also, I will say, let me see, Megan. By any chance, do you have that PDF of GoInvo, their open source journal?
Oh, yes. Let me go ahead and find that.
Yeah.
In 2 seconds.
Let's see. I figured I could Google that and find it.
The link to it is on their website now, I believe.
Talking about topals?
Yes.
Yeah. Working on it here. Okay, there we go. I'm just going to copy the link to this tweet. I'm thinking this is the one you referenced. Just kind of with that 15 or 20. Is that the one you're referencing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is a reference.
And this is the Involution Studios, their website. It's open source healthcare. It's actually open source healthcarejournal.org, but it redirects to that. But oh yeah, everybody, I forgot to say Megan and Megan, they asked us to contribute to their next journal.
That's just wonderful. So yeah, if you're not familiar, GoInvo, GoInvo, they're phenomenal, and they have a new journal that's coming out. It's going to be a series of them. This first one, though, is very much dedicated to why we need open source in healthcare, and it's just very much worth a read. There's a lot of good information on how to make things better for patients, and just wonderful things for that just have more advocacy, and just transition of ease of record sharing, and just why this is a good idea and a next step into the future.
And this is Involution Studios website too. Just goinvo.com. And you've probably seen their Determinants of Health poster. It's the #1 shared diagram of the Determinants of Health. I absolutely love it. I got a big one out in my office, and I've highlighted the certain determinants that we can impact, and we're going to try to focus on. So every day I walk by and I look at it, and I just think about, this determinant affects this determinant, and then it just kind of starts. You see how they all start connecting, and you fix one, you fix a lot more. And if you go off track with one, other ones go off track. Kind of know that from personal experience too. Oh, interesting. All right. Well, we've got a lot of activity going on this chat box. So there, yeah, that's a journal.
I
So,
didn't already.
I'm sorry, go ahead. If anybody knows some geneticists that want to help out, please direct them our way. And I do think, up until now, we've been focused on getting our genomes analyzed, getting them sequenced. Well, now we're getting to be that where it's cost effective to do that for everybody. Well, now it's the interpretation side of it. Okay, now we have this data. What are we going to do with it? What does that mean for us? Now starting to customize diets and exercise routines based on your genetics. That's going to be a huge industry. And I mean, everybody's seen those stats of saying, like, in the next 10 years, 50% of the jobs available haven't even been invented yet. That's mind blowing. So you're starting to see a lot of these new jobs are going to be coming from the data that we're generating now, and how can we use that data to help us. So yes, just
one quick comment on that topic. The ASCO, which is clinical oncology, has a cancer link, CANCERLINQ, and that's exactly what they're doing.
Outside of.
You might look at that site and read over those, and reach out there would be probably really great, because they're doing some really great work there.
Lloyd, what was the name of that again? I'm sorry.
It's ASCO, American Society of Clinical Oncology, and the not-for-profit that's actually in their building is called Cancer Link, CANCERLINQ. So some really interesting work. I've met with them a few times, and you should probably get plugged in there. I think it would be good for if they're doing some stuff with genomic research and some other things using big data and data analytics.
Okay. I'll point out that clinical oncologists are probably day-to-day the people that use genetics the most. I mean, that's the subspecialty where generally they're involved with genetic testing on most of their patients now. That's not going to be the case for 95% of other physicians.
Also, going on the genetic side, I can tell you 5 years ago, there were a lot of genetic labs using open source, or starting and getting into the open source community. So as Lloyd said, there's certain open source communities in the healthcare, certain ones we may have been part of, I would think would be a great place to reach out for that, because I know quite a few of the genetics labs that started with that open source side of it. So definitely reach out there, because there's a lot.
Yeah, these things are popping up all over the place too, these genetic labs. So it's going to be interesting to see how the next 10 years plays out with all that. And I think microbiomics too, we hardly ever talk about that. That plays a huge role in our health. The bacteria we have in our stomach. And it seems like you got Viome and you got Ubiome. I do not recommend Ubiome. I went through 4 kits and they still can't get my stuff right. But we're going to start seeing more and more of that, and especially start seeing the personalized medicine side, personalized diets and nutrition, and really just personalized health coming from the data that we can now generate. So it's exciting. All right, everyone. Well, we've had about an hour-long discussion here. If anybody else has anything to add, let's go ahead and hit that discussion up. If not, we can keep it brief and call it a day, and then I'll reconvene in 2 more weeks for our next Health Talk.
Brennan, could I talk to you for about 2 minutes after this?
Sure. Yeah, I'll stay on. We'll keep this going. Hey, everybody, I don't know if you saw our Slack channel that I posted earlier. Let me send it again. If you do want to join, please you can go ahead and do it there. Keep the conversation going. We have a lot of interesting articles we post and talk. We have probably 30 channels. So if anything is relevant, we'll add you to those channels. Kind of getting out of control. But it's good stuff, good conversations. And also our forum, we will be launching our forum. And let me just go ahead and give you I'll give you the URL now. We just set it up. We're relaunching this forum. We had one launched a while back, but you cannot join right now. We're working on the email responders in the background, the email server. So that's the URL, but please don't try to join right now because you're not going to get that email verification. But just for future reference, that's the URL. And we'll be building this out in terms of all kind of different topics and categories. But I'll send out, everybody get that update once it is live. All right, everyone. Well, I definitely want to thank Nabil for presentation and excellent slide deck. Everything else in that slide deck is excellent too. So Nabil, if you want to share that with everybody.
Yeah, I'll share the link.
Yeah, let's go ahead and share that link now so everybody will have it.
Sorry, I'm on my phone. My computer crashed.
Here, I got it.
Oh yeah, it's in GitHub.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it's actually our repo, open source repo.
Okay, so I'll share this link anyways. Anyone with the link can view. Okay, so here's the link. If anybody wants to click on that, you can have the Google Slides. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for your time today. And on to next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks to everyone.